Hello, everyone. This is Caitlin Thomas from National Geographic Learning. We'll start in just about 30 seconds. Lovely to see people from joining all over the world. All right, let's get started. Welcome to today's webinar, Developing Confident Communicators for the Real World, presented by John Hughes. Before we get started, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the functionality of the webinar platform. First, at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that there's several icons. The first button on the left is the chat function. Please be sure to send your message to all panelists and attendees so the whole group can read your message. And as a reminder, let's keep it focused on the content of the session. On the right, you'll see a Q&A button. Please use this to ask the presenter or host questions. We'll do our best to answer questions as they come in, and we'll also have some time at the end of the session. Finally, we will be sending along a certificate of attendance and a recording of the session within 5 business days of this webinar. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker. John Hughes is an award-winning ELT author with 30 years experience of teaching and teacher training. He has worked with learners and teachers from all over the world and is a well-known conference presenter. For National Geographic Learning, he is an author on many of our series, including Life, World English 3rd edition, World Link 4th edition, Success with Business, and Total Business. He's also the author of the methodology titled Critical Thinking in ELT. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce John Hughes. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Thank you for the nice introduction and welcome everybody. Nice to see a whole range of people, all sorts of people there. Hi, Laura. Hey, Asha. There's all sorts of names popping up that I recognize and people who've been to my webinars before. So really nice to see you all. Welcome, welcome. This webinar is slightly different because often we talk a lot about language in these webinars naturally, about English and so on. In this webinar, we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to be looking at communication skills. And this is drawing a lot from my experience of teaching business English and doing communication skills training in business and so on. And I'm interested to get us thinking about what is it to be a confident communicator. You've probably all had the experience of teachers where you've had maybe that pre-intermediate student or low intermediate student whose English is quite limited to sort of A2, B1 level, but they're incredibly effective as a communicator. They're really good at using the English they've got. And then you've got the students at the kind of B2, C1 level, maybe upper intermediate or advanced, and their English is excellent, but they don't have that confidence as a communicator. Maybe they lack inner confidence, or they just don't feel confident maybe standing up and speaking in public. Now, we're all going to do a lot looking at getting students to present in this session, but I'm also thinking about communication just in terms of students' ability to walk into a room and strike up a conversation, or maybe attend a meeting and take part in conversation. So we're going to explore what communication really means. And we're going to be talking about outer communication and outer confidence and inner confidence in order to make confident communicators. Little bit of theory, and then I'll be giving you some practical ideas. A number of the ideas will be coming from this book called World Link, which is a series that I've worked on with National Geographic Learning. It's now in its 4th edition. It was a series of books designed to develop confident communicators and fluency, and I've written an upper intermediate level. But if you don't use the book, it doesn't matter, because everything I'm going to be saying is going to be relevant and you can integrate it into the lessons you already teach. So if you need some activities, oh, nice to see Yasin's been using it. If you want some ideas, some things to use with your students tomorrow, I'll be giving you some ideas. Can I give you a little technical tip in the chat? Because I am going to be getting you to talk to me in the chat. Make sure that the blue box in the chat is set to everyone and not to hosts and panelists. Because if you want everybody to read what you're saying, you need to have it set to everyone, okay? The important thing is that you can see me on a screen, you can see my slides, and you can see the chat. If you can do all of that, we're good to go. Let's get started. So, confident communication. I'm going to answer two questions in this session, really. We're going to define what is confident communication, what is a confident communicator, what does that mean? And then I'm going to get us to think about how, as teachers, we can encourage students' communication skills alongside their language skills, okay? This is so important as a life skill that they can communicate effectively if they're going for a job, for job interviews, if they're studying at university and they have to do presentations of their work. If they have to take a speaking exam, maybe they're walking into an exam room and the examiner's going to test their level of speaking, it's important that they communicate effectively as well as just demonstrate the English that they have. So let's take a look. What is a confident communication? First of all, let's try to define it together. I'm going to show you a photograph of a very confident communicator. This is a colleague of mine, really nice guy called Andres Russo. He's a National Geographic explorer. Now, when you first see Andres, you know he's a confident communicator. Now, there's a picture of Andres. You haven't heard him speak, but how do you know he's a confident communicator? What is it about him? Already, you know he's probably confident. Just tell me in the chat. So he's smiling. We've got eye contact, posture, body language, open. I like that. Yeah, he's relaxed. His posture, his body language, his openness, smiling. He looks ready to have a conversation. He looks, willing to talk, Aram. I like that. He's standing straight. If you walked into a room, you would feel, okay, I'm happy to talk to Andres. He looks like somebody I want to talk to. And he is. And he is relaxed and cool, Azra, as well. Yeah. His hand is inviting, empathetic, maybe. All sorts of great words coming up with the chat. And you've done this simply by looking at him. And there's a very good book, which I often have near to me by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. Some of you might have read it. He talks a lot about the importance of first impressions, and actually our first impression of somebody often becomes actually a good indication of what they're like. Not always, but it's very helpful, and it affects the way we communicate with people. Now we've looked at Andres. Now let's hear him speak. Andres is going to introduce himself, and I want you to listen to him and then tell me in the chat, what is it about the way he speaks in English that tells you he's a confident communicator? Here he comes.
My name is Andres Russo. I'm a geothermal scientist and a National Geographic explorer. You probably know the word scientist, but can you guess what a geothermal scientist does? Let me give you a hint. The word geothermal comes from two Greek words, geo, which means earth, and therme, which means heat. What do you think? Exactly. I am a scientist who studies Earth's heat.
Okay, so now you've heard his English. One of you said he's very articulate. He knows what he does. So he's very confident with his content. He's encouraging. He's trying to involve the audience. He uses rhetorical questions, doesn't he? He asks us a question and pulls the answer from them. Intonation's really important in the way he speaks. He's confident. He's natural. Natural's an important word, Erica. Thanks for that. Yeah. He maintained all of those qualities like eye contact, but his pronunciation's particularly important. He's fluent. He's not in a hurry, right? He's quite controlled. His delivery is quite controlled. He's very well prepared, Khalid, yeah. His voice smiles. I love that, Lynn. It does. It kind of, you can see his voice, the way it comes to you. It's very natural. English is not his first language. Spanish is. But he really uses his English really effectively. Breaks down the information. His delivery of the content is very accessible to us. Positive gestures, I think it's interesting, and we'll come back to this later, the way he uses body language with his pronunciation. I often think of pronunciation in English as the body language of English. What I mean by that is we often concentrate on grammar and vocabulary, but it's actually pronunciation that gives the body language. And Solmaz thinks he's handsome. Well, the fact he's handsome also helps Solmaz. Yeah, it's true. Audience friendly. His delivery is great, but it's the pronunciation, the clarity, it's personal, it's natural. Let's explore this a little bit more. I think we can talk about two types of confidence. And in Andrei's case, one of the first things we notice is he's very fluent. And fluent is not the same as accuracy, as we know. But in terms of outward confidence, we're interested in him being fluent, in his communicative competence. Somebody mentioned this word in the chat, that he's very natural. He is incredibly natural. When you're talking to him, it just flows very naturally. He's engaging to listen to. There's something about him. Lynn said his voice kind of smiles at you, and it's that engagement that makes him incredibly confident. And it's not something you can necessarily do just straight away, but it's part of that communication. And also his body language is meaningful. He doesn't move around a lot. Like when I present, I tend to be guilty of moving around a lot. Andres is quite controlled, and he uses his body language and his gestures only when he really wants to kind of emphasize something. So he's kind of effective. Good point, Sylvia. I'll come on to that in a minute. But we can talk about outer confidence, but we can also talk about inner confidence. And I think inner confidence is kind of interesting when we're working with students, because we can say somebody's very fluent and a student can sound fluent, but students are normally also concerned with their accuracy. And inside, students want to know that what they're saying is absolutely correct. So quite often students will say, but is it right? Is what I've just said, is it accurate? And they can be fluent and outwardly confident, but inside they want to know if it's correct. And that accuracy for internal confidence is really important. So fluency and accuracy there become real issues, I think, in confident communication. We decided that Andres sounded very natural, but actually, when you meet Andres, and I've watched Andres prepare, he's incredibly planned and he really rehearses what he's going to do. He doesn't just stand up in front of a group of people and start talking. He really plans it and really rehearses it. And I think this is really important from a language teaching point of view. Students need rehearsal time. We can't just expect them to start speaking about something. They need to think about what they're going to say and how they're going to say it, as well as what English do they need. So planning time and rehearsal time is really important. And I think we have to think of the classroom as a rehearsal space. It's a place to make mistakes. It's a place to try out real speech. And you might have problems, but the point of it is it's rehearsal time. And we'll come back to that. It's really important. I like Sylvia's 5 Ps, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Very good. Difficult to say, but good for the per sound. So planned and rehearsed. We said that he's engaging to listen to, and I think one of the reasons is because he makes it very personal. I think Laura earlier in the chat says he has something to say and share. And he's confident, he wants to tell you about himself, but he makes it personal. And when we often talk about personalization in language learning, if we personalize vocabulary on grammar, it helps students memorize it. But also in terms of communication, if we make things personal and we base what we're saying on personal experience, it's more interesting for other people. We often talk about the importance of storytelling. And if you tell stories, and particularly if you tell personal stories, it suddenly becomes much more interesting to listen to. So making it personal is important. Another tip for inner confidence, we talked about meaningful body language, and I think meaningful pronunciation is important. And you picked out when Andres was speaking, he was very sort of fluent, but he used intonation effectively. And in a minute, we'll notice how he used pausing effectively as well. He really pauses very carefully during his presentation. And that adds to the sound of him being confident. And I think body language and pronunciation have an interesting relationship, because we often stress certain words with the way we deliver it with our body, and that ties in with pronunciation. Erica says both are important. Yeah, I think they kind of work together. For example, if I want to stress something and I want to speak to you directly, or I want to emphasize a point, and I'm stressing certain words, notice that my hand will stress the word. And obviously we don't do that all the time, but quite often the way we use our body is linked carefully with the way we stress certain key words when we're delivering information. Sylvia, your comment about, body language accounting for 75 to 80%, maybe that's quite high, but I think it draws attention to the fact at the beginning I just showed you a photograph of Andres, and instantly you started making assumptions about who he was and his communication. And it's so tied up with our initial perceptions, and quite often those perceptions are great. I love Olivia's comment. In Italy, it's about 95%. Yes, possibly. So outer and inner confidence. Now, so far, I've talked particularly about Andres and his short presentation, his introductory presentation. There's something else which somebody mentioned earlier, and that is for confident communicators, show interest and they listen. Now, I can't show you this in the video, but if you meet Andres, he's very good at listening to other people. He's good at showing he's interested in what you have to say. He asks questions and he uses phrases to listen. And confident communicators don't just deliver in one direction. They're very good at listening and showing that they're listening. And that's an important part of confidence. And I think we can help students with that a lot by giving them the language they need. And it also ties in with body language, for example, nodding at somebody, raising your eyebrows, showing that you're listening to them. But in particular, I think it's linguistic, and we'll come back to it. And finally, I think confident communicators or effective communicators are very good at self-evaluating their performance and reflecting. So if they do a presentation, or they attend a meeting, or they go out to some important event connected with work or studies, afterwards, they're the sort of person that reflects on how did it go? What could I have done better? What went well? And I think as teachers, we can help students develop those reflective skills to help them grow as communicators. I mean, confident communication takes a long time to learn, and it's part of life experience. But I think we can train students and develop their skills to reflect on their own performances. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So if we tie all of that together, that's kind of the idea of outer confidence, inner confidence, what can we do as teachers? How can we as teachers develop those communication skills? Well, we can certainly balance fluency and accuracy in the classroom. We can make sure that both are dealt with, particularly when we're doing speaking activities with students. And you'll all be familiar with this idea of balancing fluency and accuracy. Encouraging personalization, wherever you can, try to bring in personalization into the classroom. I have my own personal rule, which is in a 90-minute lesson, I'd expect personalization to happen maybe 2 or 3 times, probably at the beginning, when you lead into a lesson, or you say to students, how was your weekend? Or if the topic is sport, you find out what kind of sports they like doing. So you personalize the beginning of the lesson. Usually I like to personalize the end of the lesson, so they're doing some kind of speaking activity that's productive where they relate it to their own lives. But also if we're teaching grammar and vocabulary, maybe halfway through a lesson, I'll try to get them to personalize it in some way. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Building in planning time and rehearsal strategies. This is so important. If you say to students, can you rehearse your presentation, or can you practice a dialogue in pairs? They've got to know what you mean. It's not enough just to say, go and practice it. You've got to give them ways of practicing it. So we'll look at that in a minute. Strategies are really important for good communication. Developing confident body language, we can help students with that, and it's linked with developing confident pronunciation. I'll give you some suggestions for that in a minute. Teach the language of showing interest to show that you're listening, and train students in the skills of self-evaluation and reflection. So there's our kind of theory. Now we're going to look at some practical bits. Is everybody okay in the chat room? You're keeping up? Is everything clear? If you've got a question, feel free to ask. There is a Q&A section, but okay, Sylvia's told me it's perfect. Good, crystal clear, thank you. Off we go. So let's get on to the practical stuff, okay? Balancing fluency and accuracy. One issue of fluency and accuracy is materials design. When we design classroom activities, say speaking activities, we need to be thinking about where in the activity is students practicing fluency and where they're practicing accuracy. Now, if you look at the activity on the screen here, I've chosen an activity from WorldLink, and the teacher has just presented the structure, have you ever? So present perfect for life experiences. Have you ever had a job interview? Have you ever won a competition, traveled overseas? And I've done the classic thing where students do kind of a classroom survey, or they interview their partner, or they interview other people in the group. So what that is focused on is accuracy. We want students to use the have you ever structure properly, correctly. So they're going to have to turn the verb into a past participle. So have you ever had a job interview? Have you ever won a competition? And as a teacher, I'm listening to check that students are getting that right. But what I like to do when I design a classroom activity is make sure that accuracy is in there, but offer the opportunity for fluency. And you'll notice in the design of this activity, on the left-hand side, it's the have you ever structure. And then students answer, yes, I have, no, I haven't. But then the student can ask you more questions. So question one, have you ever had a job interview? If the other student said, yes, I have, the other student would then say, when did you have it? Where did you go for the interview? Who was it with? What was the job it was for? And you'd encourage them to use all that other language that they have. So it's not just accuracy and it's not just present perfect. So what you're trying to do is get a mixture of accuracy and fluency. So you're building that inner confidence with the accuracy, but you're giving students time to develop the outward confidence and develop that fluency. So when you design activities in class, have a think about, can I get accuracy and fluency? And what is it I'm listening for as a teacher? The other thing is about fluency and accuracy. It's really a classroom management skill. Iram's asked a question, is this only for higher level of language learners? No, I think it's for lower level as well. Obviously, with beginner students, they've got limited language, so a lot of it will be accuracy. But very quickly, as they get into sort of elementary levels, we can design activities that recycle. I mean, the key word here is to recycle vocabulary and grammar structures they've already learnt, just to become more fluent. You've got to keep repeating it and becoming more fluent. In terms of classroom management, if you give students a speaking activity where you want them to develop fluency and accuracy, it's important to think about the speaking activity. So if I give students a role play activity, for example, I've got student A, student B, and I want them to role play a conversation. I can analyze the time they're going to spend speaking. So if we imagine it's 10 minutes of the lesson, I'm going to have students speaking in pairs for 5 or 10 minutes. That's on the bottom axis. If I give them the role play, and if the role play is effective and it interests the students, their level of interest will go up and up and up. So the volume will go up, the interest level will go up, it'll reach a peak, and then it'll start to fall. So if it's successful, you'd expect that red pattern where the volume and the interest rises, and then after a while it starts to drop. The thing is, as a teacher, though, you don't really want to let it drop necessarily at the end. You've got a decision to make. Do you stop the speaking activity when it's at its noisiest and students are having their most fun? Do you stop it slightly after the noise has started to fall and the interest, but students are still busy doing it? Or do you let it go on further down? In the chat, tell me if you think, oh, sorry, I've just lost. Tell me in the chat, would you stop it at 1, 2, or 3, or somewhere else? All sorts of different opinions here. Nobody's put 1 so far. It's all 2s and 3s. Somebody put -2, which I like. Lots of you are oh, somebody's put 1. You probably did that just because I suggested it. Okay. Yeah, well, somebody said I always struggle with this in lessons. It's a really difficult skill. It's a tough classroom management skill. It's particularly difficult if you're teaching online because it's even harder to manage. Personally, and this isn't the correct answer because every situation will vary and it depends on the class and the students, but normally I would do it at number 2. Why? Because you want to get students right to the top when they're being most fluent. But if you stop them there, if you let them go all the way to the bottom, students kind of lose interest and the volume stops. If you stop it at 2, and then you give feedback on accuracy. So imagine as a teacher, you've been listening to the conversation, writing down any mistakes you hear, and then you want to give feedback to help them with accuracy. If you stop it at 2, and you say to students, stop speaking, I'm just going to give you some feedback. You can give feedback on the mistakes, and then you can say to the students, now repeat the role play, repeat the speaking activity, but this time try to make it more accurate. If you do it at 3 and give the feedback and ask students to repeat it, they might be less interested in doing it. Whereas if you stop them when they're still excited, they're more likely to repeat the role play. So what you're doing is you're balancing the fluency and the accuracy. You're allowing space for the fluency, but you're allowing time for the accuracy. And what lots of teachers do when I observe them is they don't allow time for that feedback and they don't allow time to repeat the activity. And it's really important, I think, for building confidence. It doesn't always work. Nothing always works in teaching. And sometimes you'll have a situation where you can't do it for various reasons. But as a general rule, I try to do speaking activities this way to help with the fluency and the accuracy. Experiment with it. See what happens in your own classes. But I think it's a good classroom management tip. Okay, let's move on. Personalization. I'm going to go through this quite quickly. With personalization, if you think of grammar, for example, we could introduce the grammar form used to, and then you're thinking, how can I get students to personalize it? So students do all the gap fill stuff in the book. But then in this activity from Worldly, you say to the students, okay, think about 5 years ago and write things that were true about your home, family, friends, school, favorite activities 5 years ago and write about it now. So students have some thinking time, which is important when you're personalizing. Don't ask them to speak straight away. Give them thinking time. Remember, planning is important. And then they get into pairs, and then they interview each other using the used to structure, but they're talking about their own lives. And that kind of personalization gives them a lot more confidence, because if they're learning the grammar for the first time, they might be worried about using the grammar structure, but at least they're talking about themselves, and that builds their confidence. So I think many of us do this. We try to personalize the grammar, but it's really important to always try to do it where possible. Not always possible, but quite often it is. The other thing about that activity on the screen at the moment is it involves a planning stage. And planning time is so important to build confidence with your communicators. Here's another example from WorldLink. The topic of the unit was about social media and fake identities. And students had read a text about somebody who created a fake identity in social media. So the speaking activity is that students had to create a fake identity for themselves, and then they had to introduce themselves as an unreal person. It's kind of a bit of fun, just to continue from the reading. If you ask students to start speaking straight away, it wouldn't be effective. So we in the book, we give them a planning strategy of brainstorming, and we say, here are some, think of a new name, think of a new best friend, imagine you've got some pets, think about where you live, and students kind of brainstorm this new personality. And that planning time is really important. It could take like 5 minutes, maybe more. Once they've done it, then they work in groups and they present their new identity. So they have to stand up and present themselves as this new person that they've created. The important thing about that task is that you included planning time. And sometimes teachers are nervous about silence in the classroom or having students just think and plan, but it's so important, particularly with the higher order skills. If you want students to think critically or think creatively, they've got to have planning time. Question about the slides in the chat. The slides will be available from the National Geographic site in a few days, Hatham. Okay, so you will be able to get these activities. So don't worry if you don't get everything down. You can get the slides later on. Okay, nice tip, Monica. They could actually set it up on Facebook and create a real fake identity. They could. I wouldn't encourage that, and I wouldn't want to be the teacher responsible for doing it. But nice idea. Nice idea. So planning time. Another tip, rehearsal techniques. Okay, this is really important. For me, the classroom is a space for students to rehearse and to practice and make something as good as it can possibly be with the English they have. And when they have time to rehearse and get something right, it really builds their confidence. What we did with WorldLink is in WorldLink, we have a feature called Global Voices. It always comes at the end of the unit. We have interviews with National Geographic explorers like Andres, but we also have little video, little video interviews with real students. So we had a unit on learning languages, and we found some students who were willing to just talk about how they learn English. Now, the level of their English is not always high. It's sort of intermediate, it's kind of varied. But that wasn't the point. We asked them to video themselves so that we could use the video in the course book. Now, this was quite brave. I was really impressed by the students here. They recorded themselves answering these questions about English. But what's interesting is I'm going to show you the video, and the videos are really very, very confident. And the students recorded themselves a few times. So they recorded themselves and said, oh, I don't like that. They recorded it again, don't like that, until they got it right. And I think it demonstrates when you ask students to prepare a little presentation or something for homework, is tell them to record themselves, use their phone or record it on Zoom and watch themselves back until they get it right, because they learn all sorts of skills like looking straight at the webcam or delivering it clearly. Let me show you these students. I think they're great, but they're just talking about how they learn English. See what you think.
I have 4 classes per week, and I study with another student. There are only 2 students in my classroom.
I have 4 classes per week for 5 hours each class. All classes are online, and I have just one classmate with me.
I'm learning English because I needed it for my major. I want to get a degree in the US that is to be a mental health counselor. English is important for me because I will need to speak with clients in English. I'm also preparing for the TOEFL exam now.
I'm learning English for 2 reasons. First, I live in the USA and I need to communicate with people. Second, because I have the dream of studying for a master's degree here. That's why learning English is important to me. In addition, I'm preparing for the TOEFL test.
So, weren't they amazing? I mean, I think it's incredibly brave. They agreed to be in a textbook and they worked really hard, but basically they were rehearsing their answers until they got it right. And I think it highlights how effective video is, and recording yourself, even just recording your voice, is in terms of rehearsal and getting something right. Really great for their confidence. Great to build their confidence. Which brings us on to also another topic of body language, and recording with video is really helpful for students to think about their body language and the importance of it. In WorldLink, I included a reading text about comedians, because I thought, well, stand-up comics and comedians are incredibly effective communicators, but I also found comedians where English is not their first language. They actually learn English and they try to do comedy in English. And I thought this was amazing. And the picture of the woman in the article there is, she's Japanese. She's called Yuriko. And she came to live in England and she learned English, and she was just working in an office, and she decided, well, I'm going to learn English and then I'm going to start doing stand-up comedy. And one of the techniques she used was to start videoing herself and watching videos. And in the feedback, when she was training to be a comedian, if you like, she said, lots of people told me I had a deadpan expression, but I didn't know what deadpan meant. So I looked it up in the dictionary because I always thought I was smiling. And then she watched the video of herself and she thought, yeah, she looks kind of deadpan or angry. If you want to watch Yuriko, you can go to YouTube. Don't go now, go afterwards. Just put into YouTube Yuriko Katani. And she does TV shows in England. She's been on a station called Channel 4, but you'll find her on YouTube. She does really interesting comedy, sometimes about the difference between Japanese culture and English culture. Really interesting to watch. But she also makes fun of the fact that her face is very serious, but she thinks that she's kind of smiling. And then she watches herself in video and she's quite deadpan or almost angry looking. And it highlights this need for, if students video themselves, they get a sense of what they're like in terms of body language. Developing body language is an interesting one, really, because it requires kind of confidence, but we look at a student's body language and we make decisions about their confidence. And I think we can do little things in the classroom to help students with developing body language. One thing, and if you've been to some of my other talks, I've probably talked about this before, the idea of getting students to mime and doing activities that involve physical movement. And this is particularly true if you teach online. One of the problems you've got is that students are sitting all day or even lying all day, and they're not moving around. And if you want to develop body language, you want to become relaxed about moving your body. So any activity in the classroom that involves mime or movement is really important. So the verbs on the screen here, this is from an exercise in WorldLink where it's with the upper intermediate students. And on the left-hand side, we show the upper intermediate students everyday verbs, like quite low-level verbs, A1 verbs, write, look, shout, walk, eat, breathe. And on the right-hand side, we show descriptive B2 level verbs, verbs that have similar meaning, like write, copy, and scribble, but copy and scribbling have a higher level meaning. And what I do to teach these is I mime them to the students, and the students guess what I'm miming, and then I get students to mime the verbs. And it's a nice way of developing confidence with body language. Let me demonstrate, if you haven't seen this, just to demonstrate the everyday verbs on the left. I'm just going to mime one of them. As soon as you know the answer, type it in the chat box. Who gets the answer first? Breathe, Rebecca. Although it could have been smell, in fairness, but it was breathe. It was the answer. Now the descriptive verbs, okay? Here's the first descriptive verb. Write it in the chat box as soon as you know the answer. Scribble, correct, Jana. We're on to the descriptive verbs. I was scribbling, all right? Here's another one. Gorge, point to Jana. And the last one. Stroll. Well, I was staring as well, but I was actually strolling. I was trying to stroll. You get the idea. So I would do it, and then I'd ask students to do it, either down the webcam or they'd come to the front of the class. And I'm kind of building their confidence about performing, because there's a little bit of acting that goes into confident communication. And sometimes you'll get students who love this kind of thing, and they're usually the confident, they're performers. But it's like party games, isn't it? Sometimes when you at parties, you say, oh, let's play a party game. And some people moan and complain. But actually, once you start the game, they get really excited and they want to take part. And I think it's a bit like that in the classroom for this kind of body language activity. You have to kind of build up to it. So developing that, and you think about how you can encourage students with body language using video, doing activities that involve movement, and get them used to performing in front of other people. Tied in with this, we talked about confident pronunciation with confident body language, and I want to go back to Andres, because one thing he does really well is use he uses pronunciation really confidently but very effectively. And when you watched him earlier and listened to him, you noticed his use of intonation and pronunciation. But let's look more closely actually at what he's really doing. I'm going to play Andres speaking again, but I've transcribed exactly what he said. And I want you to notice where he's pausing. You see the red lines on the screen? He goes, my name is Andres Russo. I'm a geothermal scientist and a National Geographic explorer. He pauses. I'm going to play him speaking. As you listen to him, notice where he's pausing between the words, and then we'll talk a little bit about what he's actually doing. Okay, here we go.
My name is Andres Russo. I'm a geothermal scientist and a National Geographic explorer. You probably know the word scientist, but can you guess what a geothermal scientist does? Let me give you a hint. The word geothermal comes from two Greek words, geo, which means earth, and therme, which means heat. What do you think? Exactly. I am a scientist who studies Earth's heat.
Now, if you really analysed Andre's speech quite a bit, you probably would have got something similar to this, and you would have drawn red lines into it. What he's doing in pronunciation terms is what we call pausing, pause groups. Sometimes the theory books call them tone units or thought groups. And it's because in English we tend to chunk language. So we say sentences in chunks. Now, when we present to, for example, a large number of people, we tend to pause. The pauses are much more noticeable. But actually, we're pausing all the time in conversations. And within each pause group, the intonation's going up and down. And he's also stressing certain words. So when he wants to stress a particular word, he'll put the pause around the word. So in the second sentence, he says, I'm a geothermal scientist and a National Geographic explorer, because he wants to stress the word and. Nicoletta, good point. You say divides geothermal into two because it's a difficult word. If your students are presenting anything technical, so if they're presenting for their studies, English for academic purposes, or they're presenting certain complicated information, and some of your students have to do that, science information, it's helpful if they think about where they're going to pause to make it easier for the audience. And also you'll notice the intonation patterns within the structure. So I get a short piece of speech like this, and students listen a few times and they try to mark the pauses, and we talk about why the person's paused in certain places. And you can do nice activities like you can hum it and students can answer it back. So sometimes if you want to demonstrate the pronunciation in a speech, it's quite useful to remove the words and to just hum the language. So if I wanted my students to have a go at sounding like Andres, I could go, my name is Andrew Russo, and I'm a geothermal scientist and the National Geographic explorer. By humming it, I'm drawing students' attention to actually what's going on, because you're removing all the vocabulary and you're just hearing the sound of it. And you can drill students that way. I mean, when I've got a student who needs to prepare a presentation for their work and they really want the delivery to be effective, we do quite precise, controlled work on pronunciation. I wouldn't do it all the time with students. It depends how I want them to be, but it's important to make them aware of it. And it should be part of their preparation that they're thinking about, well, where am I going to put the pausing and the stress? And you remember earlier I talked about how Andres sounds very natural, but he plans and he rehearses a lot. And this kind of pronunciation work is part of that sort of rehearsal time. So it's really helpful to focus a little bit of time. Always difficult. Pronunciation always gets pushed out the way. It always has grammar and vocabulary, and pronunciation's pushed to the side. In WorldLink, we have pronunciation features. So in this example, this is an exercise where students have listened to a story, and then they listen to sentences from the story, and they identify where the pause goes into the sentences. I don't have time to look into it, but I do have a YouTube channel. And if you want to see me telling the story that's on the screen, it's a myth, an African myth about thunder and lightning. And I tell the story and then I show how to analyze the pausing. You can go to my YouTube channel and you can see me telling the story from WorldLink there. Take a look at it when you've got some spare time. You could even use it with your students actually in a lesson. Take a look, but it's an interesting one to do. Okay, yes, I think it's WorldLink 2, this particular example, though we use it. Pronunciation kind of gets repeated at different levels, Sylvia, because of course we need to repeat things about pronunciation, keep working on it. Okay, coming to the end now. Showing interest in listening. confident communication is also not just about speaking, but it's listening to other people and showing you're listening. So in WorldLink, we have speaking pages dedicated to certain types of speaking. The example on the screen comes from basic sort of storytelling. And you'll notice we have a speaking strategy section where we give students phrases to tell a story, but we also give them phrases to show interest and ask about what's happening. And this is really important for proper communication, that you're not just always talking, that you're actually listening and responding. So we give students phrases like, oh, what's it about? Oh, no, really? So what did he do? What happened next? Are you serious? The interesting thing about, you can give students the phrases, but notice the intonation. What's it about? Oh, no. Oh, no. It's all of that rising intonation to add emphasis. So you can do lots of fun work with students on this to get them to really show interest. But useful language, simple to teach, not that high level. I could teach those phrases there to quite lower level students and start to develop that skill of showing interest and showing they're listening when their partner's talking. It's really important to spend some time. And again, it goes into confident communication, both their own confidence in showing they're listening, but also the other person who's speaking, it helps their confidence because they think, oh, the other person's really listening. They're really interested in what I'm saying. So it's all part of developing those communication skills. And my final tip is to train students to self-evaluate and reflect. Give students the skills to start to think about what makes good communication. In WorldLink, after every 3 units, we have a review spread. And this example I'm showing on the screen is we get students to do what I call an elevator pitch. Now, an elevator pitch is where you have 1 minute to try to convince somebody else of something. You might be convincing them that you are the best person for the job. Maybe you're trying to sell them a product or an idea, but you've got to do it in 1 minute. It's fun to do with students, but they need lots of preparation and rehearsal time. What we do on this page is we introduce students to the idea of an elevator pitch, and then they listen to 2 examples. They listen to a good example, a speaker doing it well, and then a speaker doing it less well. And they have to kind of grade the 2 speakers listening to them. And they analyze what makes the elevator pitch effective or what makes it not effective. Then, obviously, they start to create their own elevator pitch. And once they've prepared it and they've rehearsed it, they then stand up in front of their peers, maybe with their partner or other people in the group, and they peer assess each other. So they listen to each other's elevator pitches, and then they have to complete the form like this. So they're listening to their partner and saying, well, did the speaker introduce herself? Did she tell her story? Did she explain what she wants? Did she speak clearly and confidently? And did she speak for about a minute? And they're thinking about whether the presenter did that or not. And what you're doing is you're developing those evaluation and those reflection skills and getting students to think about what is it that makes somebody confident. I mean, we use this technique a lot for analyzing if students use certain language. But what we don't do in language classes quite so much is also use them to comment on their actual communication, whether they're a confident communicator or not. And I think that's something we can include with those language criteria as well to encourage students to communicate. With higher level students, I actually get them in class. I say to them, what do you think will make an effective speaker or an effective presenter? And they define the 5 criteria. I don't give the criteria to them. I say, what makes a confident communicator or what makes a confident presenter? And they write the 5 criteria, and then they use those criteria on each other. I mean, that's even better for self-evaluation and reflection, but you need to build up to that. Don't do it straight away. Wait till they get there, and maybe do it with students who are quite confident already and have started to develop some of the skills that we've talked about. Otherwise, it's too challenging. But those are things to think about to develop those reflective skills. Okay, so let's sum up. We've talked about developing confident communication, fluency and accuracy, get that balance right. Yep. Personalization. If you want to start off encouraging students to try to present, for example, give them a topic that they know something about. Don't give them something they don't know anything about. But build it into everything you do. Build in planning time, teach them rehearsal strategies. It's so easy now for students to record themselves with their phone or on Zoom, so they can record themselves and listen back and then do it again. Develop confident body language, include activities in the class that get students up and moving around. Confident pronunciation. Pronunciation is always left out of lessons, and it's so much fun dealing with pronunciation. So think about pausing and intonation patterns and sentence stress. Teach students the language of showing interest, so they actually listen to each other. Students need to listen to each other, and train them in the skills of self-evaluation and reflection. Those are my tips. That brings me to the end. I think, Caitlin, we've got about 5 minutes for questions, if I'm right.
We sure do. Thanks so much, John. That was excellent, and a lot of chatter in the chat box and some good questions. Kind of going along with what we just spoke about. We have a few, but this is really relevant to especially that rubric. Lynn had a nice tip that I know I've certainly experienced with when you have those very kind students in your class. How do you encourage students not to just give everybody's those thumbs up and double smiley faces in the hopes that everybody's going to do the same for them, or maybe just, you know, trying to be very kind to your peers? How do you try to get that constructive criticism to really make it meaningful?
Yeah, what I often find, though, is the first time I do it, most students will be doing lots of smiley faces, and that's fine to some extent because you just want to get everybody used to it. And I think actually once students get used to you using those feedback forms, they do actually start to analyze it. Or I might even challenge students. So if a student's gone tick, 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 all smiley faces, I might actually say to that student, are you sure? Was that bit clear? Don't you think? And I might actually challenge them a little bit. Because I think it's no good just students ticking smile, smile, smile. Equally, you don't want the student that just ticks everything is bad. You know, you might say to the students, pick out 3 things that were really good, and then maybe what's one thing that you think the student could improve on. I mean, that's another way of doing it. Don't give them the checklist form. Say to them, when you give your feedback, tell the students 2 things you really liked about their presentation and tell them 1 thing that they might work on. And that way you're forcing them to actually think critically about what they've just observed. So that's one way around it as well.
That's great. Thanks, John. Farouz had a good question. Why do some students keep struggling with their fluency in a real world setting, but seem to be very fluent in the classroom? That sort of classroom versus the real world balance. And what do we do with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, isn't it? It's that because as a teacher, you create the conditions in your classroom and students get used to you and used to the classroom. So naturally they become confident because they're in a very safe space. I mean, you know, if you're a good teacher, you create this environment where students kind of, it builds their confidence and they think, well, I can make mistakes. It's okay. I can practice. And then when they go into the real world and they go into a shop for the first time and ask for something in English, and it's like, you know, they sort of fear. I mean, ultimately they can only do it by trying. And I think they have to just sort of, as a teacher, you maybe say to them, you know, go out and try it, practice it in English. And you just have to take that risk. But again, you know, that's also comes back to is like, we talk about mixed ability. I mean, even within a language class, we can say, oh, I teach an A2 or a pre-intermediate language class. But we know all the students are at different levels. And equally with communication skills and confidence, we're dealing with mixed ability. And we know that all students work at different levels of confidence and communication. Some students will walk out of the classroom, feel confident. Other students are going to need more time. And it's to do with, its personality, and it's a number of different factors. But all you can do is encourage them to take that risk. There's a lot of risk taking involved in communication development, isn't it? In the same way there is in language learning.
Yeah, and another way we try to help you with that is in those real world link sections, we actually build in a choice activity that gets students out and using their language in the community. It's different levels of commitment, so you can use the language within the classroom, or we can actually structure, such as going in and asking for a menu in a local shop or in a local restaurant. So there's different ways we can do that. But listen, we're right at time, and I do have a few housekeeping announcements to make.
Okay.
Thanks again, John. Really fantastic as always. And thank you for everyone who joined today. Just a few things. Right after this session, you'll be directed to a feedback survey to let us know what you thought. Please do let us know. If you're interested in learning more about WorldLink, I'm going to put the direct URL to the product page right here in the chat. Do please hop on and explore more, or contact your local National Geographic Learning representative, and that link is also in the chat box. And be sure to join our online community for teachers of English on our social media channels, where we'll offer up-to-date information about events, practical classroom tips, real-world content, and exciting product information. So thanks, John, one more time. Thanks to everyone who participated, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks, Emily. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye now.